What do you think the difference is right now with this particular generation? When I turned 16, you could get a driver's license when you were 16.
Right.
In some states now, it's what, 18?
Some states, yeah.
Yeah, but when I turned 16, you could get it when you were 16.
Yeah.
So when I was 15, 364 days, 23
Right.
hours and 59 minutes.
Right. You were ready.
I was standing at the DMV to
Right.
get a driver's license.
Right.
I didn't have a car, but I wanted a driver's license so I could drive because that was freedom. Right now, you could move,
Right.
you could go.
Right.
And now, this generation, they don't even go get a driver's license when they're 16.
They don't need to.
They don't want them.
Right.
They have no urgency for it.
It's their phone helps them. They have Ubers. They don't need anything. They don't have those kinds of needs that we did a long time ago.
They're dating at a later date.
Yep.
They're getting their driver's license later.
Yep.
They're having sex later. They just don't seem to have the urgency to get engaged, involved with the world
Right.
the way we did in an earlier generation.
Kind of sad a little bit because it's holding them back.
And now I think this slows them down even more.
Yes, a lot more because now they're laden with anxiety and lots of academic issues and lots of social issues.
And I say slow them down as though it's a bad thing. They do what they want to do. It's not that it's wrong. It's just different.
Right. And it'll be an impact on a generation that we didn't expect, I think.
But I think what's happened now does slow them down.
Yeah.
Before, maybe it was just a preference because they were more homebodies and all. But I also saw a statistic just a few days ago that loneliness was higher among millennials than any other age group, even the elderly that are feeling like they're sitting off by themselves watching the paint fade, which is not true of all elderly, but I'm talking about those that maybe their loved ones have died, their spouse has died, even some of their family, and they're feeling pretty alone. Even millennials are experiencing loneliness at a higher rate per thousand than our elderly.
And I'm sure some of it has to do with technology.
I think it is. I think they're living through their phones with two-dimensional relationships.
They're sitting next to the person they're talking to.
Yeah.
Through their phone.
Yeah. It's terrible.
And that's why in the book I talk about ways to look at these things and put some parameters in place and make some family values. Start to interact and talk and reevaluate yourself.
One of the things that I obviously liked a lot about this book, because I'm talking about it so much, time for a shameless plug. I'm talking about family values. It's Dr. Sophy's new book, Reset Trust, Boundaries, and Connection with Your Child. And he said he wouldn't have this book if it wasn't for me. And I'll tell you what he means by that. I hounded him and hounded him and hounded him some more to write this book because he's had 22 years experience as medical director at Department of Child and Family Services. He's had decades experience as a board certified and licensed child psychiatrist, adult psychiatry as well. But in working with families, I just felt like one of us was going to have to write a book about this right now. And so I said, you write the book and I'll write the foreword. But I really did. I hounded you to write this book, as you know. It's just fortuitous that it came out when it did after the pandemic, when I think families need this. But
so bad.
One of the things that I really like about this is you don't ever throw parents under the bus. You really believe that inherent in every parent, there are strengths and passions that they can build on. In chapter 3 of the book, you really walk parents through identifying what their strengths are, what they're really good at as a parent. Even if they think they're a bad parent, you think there are some things they do well and they need to identify those.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that's so important?
Because I didn't walk into one home at DCFS in the middle of the night or in the daytime or whatever time we were called out to a home where I didn't see a parent who loved their child on some level. Very rarely. I mean, if they were out of control from drugs, maybe. But other than that, they loved their kid and their kids loved them. The heartbreak was taking them apart. And every kid found their way back somehow, whether we put them over here or over there. So I saw that, and that's a strength. At the very least, that's a strength. Then there were parents who cooked well or, snuggled with anything I could latch onto as a strength, we did, because that's what we built from. And that's what I want parents to do.
Yeah, you had a different approach to that, I think, than a lot of people. I'm a big fan of social workers. I think they do a noble task.
Yeah.
But your philosophy was always to unify families, not to fragment them.
Right.
You always tried to find a way
To keep them together. Yeah.
Because the alternatives were never good.
Couldn't put them back together. It's very difficult. I would stay until I could get a doctor or somebody to come and draw a blood test, so I could see if a father was on drugs, or I would leave the kid. I didn't want to take this child if we didn't have to. We even put mobile vans together to be able to bring services right there when we got there to answer questions, so we could leave them together at least overnight and get, the community to jump in, the church to jump in, somebody to help just to get us through the night. Because once we took them apart, it was hard to put back together.
Yeah, and foster care was certainly no answer.
No, a lot of times it was, and a lot of times it wasn't.
Yeah, but that's a crapshoot.
Yes.
You put them in foster care, you may get a loving, caring, giving foster parent, or you may get somebody that's running a foster kid combine.
Right. Or you could get a loving foster parent for a month, and then after that you got a monster because they can't deal with it, and then they react to it.
That biological bond is hard to replicate.
Yes, it is. And I mean, they're attached to that parent. The first 9 months of their life, they attach to that parent. And they will find their way back to that emotional safety and permanence that they can find.
Yeah. People that read this book are going to find that you help them find what they're good at and build on that.
Correct.
You don't criticize them and throw them under the bus. You do talk about toxic power dynamics, and you do a really good job talking about how to avoid confrontation head to head, like two bulls running together in the middle of the room, if possible, and finding some other way to resolve conflict.
Right. I mean, what good is it when you're both at it? We're not going anywhere. And I always tell parents, if there's somebody's yelling, start to whisper. If we whisper, that person who's yelling has to stop to listen. At the very least, use that. But conflict isn't going to be resolved when you're head to head.
Yeah. Do you think everybody has, whether it's inherited or they've specifically chosen it, everybody has a predominant parenting style, right?
Yeah, whether they experienced it themselves or they've inherited it or they've been traumatized into whatever, yes. They enter parenting with a preconceived idea of what it should be like and who they're going to be in it.
I used to have parents that would come in and they would be at odds about who was right and who was wrong. And they would come in and argue to the death. And I'm sitting there thinking, ain't neither one of you within a country mile of what you ought to be doing. Both of you need to just hit the erase button and start over because you hadn't got a clue of what this child's going to respond to.
Right.
You're doing the best you can. Children learn what they live, and you're just kind of reflecting how you were brought up.
Doesn't have to be that way.
And I'm not going to tell everybody everything in the book, but you talk about the balanced parent, the feather parent, the seesaw parent, the tyrant. You talk about the different styles of parenting, and you really have to match this to your child's personality.
Correct. And you may change within those parenting styles from month to month, week to week, depending on your child's development and how they respond.
I always told parents, if you've got a rebellious child, you don't want to take an authoritative approach.
Right. You got two head-to-heads.
It doesn't work. If you've got a really passive child, you don't want to take a permissive approach.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys will sit there and watch each other doze off. I mean, somebody's got to take the initiative.
Right. Exactly.